monitor, sorry. It's me. I want to make sure you can hear me. I'm the type that I like to be loud and I like to have some kind of interaction and know that people are hearing me. So I know you're the same way, but it's good to be here. It's a blessing to serve under Pastor Wendell. I wasn't always this good looking and dressed this handsome all the time. First off, I want to recognize my mom and my grandma and my brother here, so I want everybody to see. Stand up and wave real quick. It's a blessing. Brother Marlo, like was talking about earlier, how not only are the men's lives changed, but the families' lives are changed also. And addiction is a family problem. It's not just an individual problem. And it's very prevalent even in our churches these days with the epidemic that's going on. And I, as a young kid, started rebelling around the age of 12, giving my mom a hard time, my grandma a hard time. I just got some reason decided to just start rebelling, and everything I did I rebelled at. I rebelled in school. I began smoking cigarettes, skipping school to smoke cigarettes. It led into more drug use. By the age of 16, I was already selling drugs. I had experimented with many different kinds of drugs, and I would sell these drugs because it would make me a lot more money than what I was making just working my regular job. And as I would experiment, any kind of drug that I could get a hold of, I pretty much would try. But it wasn't until around the age of 18, I found this blue pill I got charged $35 for. It was a lot more than any other pills I'd ever spent any money on. And I took this blue pill, it was called an Oxycontin, and my life began dramatically, very quickly dropping from that point on. When I felt this buzz, I said, and mind you, I've tried most drugs that were out there. I was selling acid. I had tried all kinds of different various drugs, but when I tried this drug, it's a prescription painkiller, if you don't know. Doctors are giving out these drugs, and when I tried this drug, I said, if I can feel like this for the rest of my life every single day, I will be perfectly fine. It felt so good. And what started as just a weekend thing, more people started asking me for this pill, so therefore I'd have to get it more often, and it got to the point where I was using it daily. My tolerance began to grow, though. Although at first I was feeling high every day and feeling good, my tolerance began to grow on it, and it got to a point where I was no longer getting high. And then when I didn't have it, I found out that I would be what we call, and drug addicts call, dope sick. I couldn't function, I couldn't get up and go to work, and I began having to do a lot more things to get this money, because at that time it had gotten to $55, $60 a pill. And when you have to take 5 pills a day, that's $300 a day. So I began stealing. I would steal from my family. I remember a long time ago, it's actually the first time it just came to mind, stealing money out of my brother's dresser drawer, money he had been saving up. I mean, I got to my lowest of lows. I just even probably 6 years ago had pawned some rims and wheels that he had in the garage of my mom's house to go get drugs, his little mini fridge. The drugs had taken over my life. And any of you that know about painkillers or opiates, heroin, one of the biggest side effects of these drugs is after you take too much, you begin to nod out. Well, I was doing electrical work at that time, and I'd be driving to the job site, and I was always on these pills, because if I wasn't on them, I'd be dope sick. I'd be driving to the job site, and I would pass out in rush hour traffic there in Indianapolis on the interstate, bounce off the median. I would wake up on the wrong side of the interstate at 3 o'clock in the morning, heading towards oncoming cars. I would wake up at my mom's house and walk outside and see grass hanging out of the grill of my car, and not knowing what I had hit, and just dreading walking to the other side and get to the driver's side to see it's totaled all down the side, not knowing how I made it home, what I had even hit, or how I was even still alive. God had his hand on me this whole time. Yes, it was more than a blessing of me dying. It's more of a blessing that I never killed anybody else, because I can't recollect what I hit any of those times. I could have hit somebody, I could have hit another car, and you hear of all these drunk driving accidents where people wake up in a jail and they killed somebody, and that would be the worst nightmare I could have ever had. But these drugs had taken over my life, every part of my life. I couldn't hold a job. I began ending up in jail over and over. And finally, at one point in a jail, I had been raised up better than that. And sitting in a jail, I said, there's got to be something more to life. And I was sitting in that jail cell, and I finally came to the conclusion that I did have some kind of problem. I didn't think I was necessarily an alcoholic, but I was at least probably a drug addict. And I began seeking help through some NA and AA secular programs. I went through 2 inpatient drug programs in the jail. I would get released from there to halfway houses, and I'd always seem to do good, but it would only last for about 3 months. Within 3 months, or the first time I was allowed to go out on my own, I would end up getting high in no time. And I couldn't figure out what it was. I kept finding myself over and over in jail. And finally, in 2007, April of 2007, I walked into a jail. I got booked in again, and there was this young man sitting up on the table when I walked into the jail. And there's 16 cells in here, a lot of men, very intimidating setting. The lights are a little bit dimmer, concrete floors. And this guy said, "You used to sell coke on my block, didn't you?" And I thought, oh, here we go. This is going to be real good. And it was another man that had been selling cocaine around the same time I was in the same apartment complex there in Lebanon, Indiana. And what I didn't know is that God was already at work. From that moment, God was at work. And within probably 2 months, the Lord began speaking to this other drug addict, this other drug dealer, and spoke into my life, and God came and radically saved me, transformed me right there in a jail. In a jail where you have to hold yourself to a higher standard. You have to put on a front and this fakeness that you're so hard. God broke me right there in the jail. It wasn't a preacher leading me to the altar. He spoke to another drug addict. He came and changed my heart. Tears began flowing down my face in front of all these other criminals. And God changed my life, and I began trying to tell people about Jesus. I got out of jail. I went to my old friends. I didn't know any better. I didn't have any discipleship like I had now. And I began trying to tell my friends, look, you can get off them pills. The pills are an epidemic. And most people on them, once they get hooked, they don't want to be on them. I want you to know that these people that are strung out on these pills and these heroin, once they're strung out on them, most of them don't want to be in that position. And we have to admit it, that it's a problem in the church, and we have to figure out ways to help them and reach them, because God can use them if we can help to get them off the drugs, instead of shunning them and pushing them out of the church because we're afraid they're going to come steal from them. And I began trying to tell these people, when I tell them they could get off the drugs, they'd say, well, how's that? But the second I said Jesus, they'd turn around and walk away. They probably had a negative image, a negative church sample as a child, but I ended up falling back into drugs. My grandma was the strong Christian in my family, and she had moved from Indiana to Florida. And after falling back into the drugs after getting saved, I finally picked up, and within 2 days I said, I'm moving to Florida. I came to Florida to get away from drugs, to get to my grandma's, not knowing this was where Oxycontins are manufactured, and this is where 80% of the pills are manufactured in the U.S. So it got a hold of me. But I was sitting at a church in Fellowship Church in Englewood, Florida, and Pastor Wendell with my grandma, crying out to God. Every week I'd sit on the back rows and say, God, you'd set me free from them drugs before. I know you can do it again. And one day God brought Pastor Wendell Wilson and the men up on stage just like this. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I knew I wanted to get off drugs. And within a few months, I had hit my rock bottom. I called Pastor Wendell. He accepted me into the program. And I began getting my first taste of discipleship. It was tough. Being a follower of Christ is not easy if you want to live for your flesh. And see, you can get off drugs. Let me tell you, you can get off drugs and you can be sober without living for Christ. There's a lot of people doing that, NA and AA. We call them dry drunks. They're 50 years old. They've been sober for 20 or 30 years, but they still live in defeat. They still live angry all the time because they don't have Christ. See, for us to get totally free from the addiction, get free from our old self, Jesus was the only one that climbed up on that cross, got put on that cross, and shed his blood for our freedom. It wasn't a higher power that NA and AA proclaims. It wasn't just something bigger and better than yourself. None of that died for your sin. It was only Jesus. So when I finally began to surrender my life to Christ, God began using me. As I said, it was a tough program. I left over and over. The devil did not want me in Loving Hands Ministries at all. And I left probably 3 or 4 times. I don't know if Pastor Wendell's ever let someone come back 3 or 4 times. And even on top of that, he even approached me asking me to come back. We don't go chasing people to bring them back to the ministry. When they leave, we just put it in God's hands. But God knew, Pastor Wendell knew something was going on. And I learned since coming back this last time and finally getting to that point of dying to myself and getting to that point of surrendering and saying, whatever it takes, I'm all yours, Jesus. God began implanting in me. And we've learned now that God is raising me up to take Pastor Wendell's place. And that was why the devil was so on me. Because, see, I thought I was just coming here to get a program out of the way, get cleaned up, and get put back in the world. I just wanted to get on with my life. And I've learned since then God's called me here full time to serve Christ with the rest of my life through Loving Hands Ministries and be this man's assistant. And God is doing great things. You're going to hear through some of these other men. But just since surrendering, God is taking my life and doing things with it I never thought was possible. All because I surrendered. It's not about getting off the drugs and alcohol. It's not about getting sober. It's about surrendering your life to Christ and everything in it. You're going to hear some of these testimonies. I'm going to have Clay, will you come share first, please?
Amen, amen.